Today, in her first visit to the West Bank, the Foreign Minister tells Palestinian leaders Australia backs ceasefire calls in the Israel-Gaza war.
Australians are concerned with the loss of civilian life, which is mounting.
Two 16-year-old boys charged with murder after the killing of a doctor in a Melbourne home invasion. The unemployment rate holds steady at 3.9%. And a local lineup on day 5 of the Australian Open with 3 Aussies on the court. Hello and welcome to ABC News. I'm Ros Childs. Foreign Minister Penny Wong has met with Palestinian leaders on her tour of the region to push for peace. In her first visit to the West Bank, Senator Wong told the Palestinian Prime Minister that Australia supports calls for a ceasefire in the Israel-Gaza war. She also voiced the government's support for a 2-state solution. The visit is part of a 3-day tour of the Middle East, with Ms Wong meeting Israeli power brokers yesterday. Tomorrow she'll travel to the United Arab Emirates. Here's some of what she had to say after today's talks.
Australia is a friend of Israel's. We are also a friend of the Palestinian people. Australians are increasingly concerned about the civilian toll and are increasingly concerned about the urgent need for humanitarian access. I've spoken about the risk of regional escalation, and we have spoken about settler violence. These and many other issues have informed my discussions.
Senator Wong's visit comes as a shipment of aid for Israeli hostages and for people in Gaza arrives in the territory under the first agreements between Israel and Hamas since the week-long ceasefire in November. Here's our Global Affairs editor, John Lyons, with me in the studio. Hi, John. So tell us more about who Penny Wong has met and what was discussed during her Middle East visit so far.
Well, Ros, she's in the West Bank. It's a confronting place to be. She's met Palestinian leaders. It's what was originally designated by the UN to be a Palestinian or an Arab state. It's now under Israeli military occupation. And everyone's focused on Gaza since October 7. But in fact, the West Bank, or the occupied Palestinian territories, there have been more than 300 Palestinians killed by Israeli soldiers and Israeli settlers, including 95 children. For example, 3,000 olive trees have been cut down, which Palestinians are growing on their farms, which is in some ways their economic lifeblood. So 300 cut down. Some of them are 20, 30, 40 years old, these trees. And there's been an increase of 60% in the number of Palestinian homes that the Israeli army is demolishing. So there's been, while the world's been focused on Gaza, what's been happening in the West Bank has been quite extraordinary. So Penny Wong will be hearing those sorts of stories while she's there.
Yeah. Now, medicine and other aid is making its way into the territory in a deal that was brokered by France and Qatar. The aid desperately needed, of course, but what's the significance of the deal itself?
Very interesting deal, this one. France has been involved in Qatar. The deal is that the Israelis and Hamas will agree that there'll be a lot of humanitarian medications and aid go in there for civilians, Palestinian civilians, as well as there's still 132 hostages kept in Gaza by Hamas. 45 of them are in serious need of medication. So part of the deal is that the medication will be taken in for the 45, as well as medication for the civilians. Now, this is interesting. A month or so ago, this deal probably wouldn't have happened because Hamas would have been worried that the Israelis would have tracked where the hostages were, where the aid was going, and the Israelis probably would have tried to rescue them. But that hasn't worked. There's been quite a few Israeli hostages killed. For example, a few weeks ago, 3 Israelis came out holding flags without shirts. They were clearly not combatants. They were shouting out in Hebrew, "Please help, please help." But the Israeli soldiers couldn't hear with the noise. They assumed they were Palestinians, so they shot them dead. So the Israelis now are reluctant to go in and try to do that sort of commando operation. So they want to get them out through hostages, and I think this is a prelude to a bigger deal, which the White House is hinting at, 30, 40, 50 more hostages, which would be great.
Looking at other unrest in the region then, the US has now recognised the Houthis as a terrorist organisation. What's the significance? What's going to be the impact of that?
The impact now is that legally around the world, anybody who's connected to the Houthis, whether it's their finances or they're travelling, the Americans can try to detain them or freeze their assets. The Houthi political leader Mohammed al-Buqaiti has said that he says the US decision is farcical. It won't have an immediate practical effect, but it does designate them. I'm sure Australia will now do the same thing as we've done with Hezbollah and Hamas. And it will mean that it makes it harder for those Houthi leaders to travel anywhere in the world. It really starts to put a cage around them.
And there's been a recent attack in that region, the Red Sea, John.
That's right. There's still, the Houthis have responded to those air attacks by the UK and the US. So that's not over yet. However, if the Gaza war ends, the Houthis have said, we finish in the Red Sea.
John, thank you.
Thank you.
2 teenagers have been charged with murder over the death of a young doctor in Melbourne. Ash Gordon's body was found after a suspected aggravated burglary in the city's northeast on Saturday morning. Reporter Stephanie Ferrier has more.
These 2 boys, both aged 16, will appear in the Children's Court at a later date charged with murder, aggravated burglary and theft. And this relates to an incident in Doncaster in Melbourne's northeastern suburbs in the early hours of Saturday morning. Police discovered the body of much-loved GP, 33-year-old Dr Ash Gordon in Eildon Street around 5:30 in the morning. That's just a short distance away from his home in Sargent Street, and it's understood he was alerted to intruders in his home. He then called out to his housemate to get in contact with 000 before chasing these offenders from the home, and police say that is when a confrontation occurred and the GP was fatally stabbed. Now, he was a much-loved member of the local community and really valued in Box Hill, where he practiced as a GP, as well as opening up a cosmetic clinic in Richmond in Melbourne's east. He was also the youngest of 5 siblings and was the beloved uncle of 5 nieces and 3 nephews. And the Serious Crimes Division Superintendent Janet Stevenson says that homicide squad detectives have worked tirelessly alongside specialist units and local police to identify, locate and apprehend the people that they believe were responsible for this tragedy. She goes on to say that we know that Ash's family and loved ones are grieving. This arrest will not take away the tragedy of this dreadful situation, but we hope that it will alleviate some of their distress, and we will continue to provide all the support that they require during this difficult time. And she does reflect again on just how valued he was in the community and how everybody is struggling to make sense of what has occurred. She says she understands that this does create fear and uncertainty, but says that Victoria Police are doing everything that they can to ensure that people feel really safe in their own homes, and will do all in their power to make sure that that becomes a reality.
Stephanie Ferrier there. A Melbourne police officer has been charged with a number of sexual offences. The senior constable from North West Region has been over 4 alleged incidents that occurred between 2020 and 2023 while they were on duty. The incidents took place in Calcallo, Greensborough, Fawkner and Epping. The 49-year-old will appear in court at a later date. And police are appealing for help to identify a man seen leaving a Sydney City hotel where another man's body was found last week. Crime reporter Leah Harris has been following the story.
Police were called here to the York Hotel in the Sydney CBD just before 6 p.m. last Friday morning, where they found the body of a 43-year-old man. They set up a crime scene here that evening and they spoke to a man and a woman who were inside the apartment, one of whom called 000 to alert them to the man's body. Police do believe that the woman may have been in a relationship with the dead man. Both of those people were interviewed extensively but have been released without charge. And this morning, police have released CCTV of another man who they want to speak to about this case. He was seen leaving the apartment, leaving the hotel building around 8 a.m. the morning this man's body was found on Friday the 12th, before driving away in a white ute. So So they are appealing for information about him, and they haven't said exactly how this man died, but they are treating his death as suspicious, and they have told us just a short time ago about some suspicious items found in the room.
Crime scene were engaged and they reviewed the unit and the items located within it. During that, we located drug paraphernalia and other substances. We also located some handwritten notes, which are going to be the subject of ongoing forensic analysis.
So police are calling for the public's help to solve this case. They are asking anyone who may recognise the man in that CCTV or may have any information about what happened here last Friday to contact them.
The New South Wales State Emergency Service has responded to a surge of calls for help after heavy rain caused flash flooding in parts of Sydney. The SES received 116 calls in Greater Sydney from midday yesterday, with more than 90 occurring after 6 p.m. Most calls were concentrated in Sydney's eastern suburbs. Senior meteorologist Miriam Bradbury says it's been a wet 24 hours, not just in New South Wales.
We saw very widespread rainfall totals in the 20 to 40 millimetre range across eastern New South Wales and much of Victoria as well, with some much higher isolated totals. Now that really passed through Melbourne through the early morning yesterday, and by the time it reached Sydney it was more like the middle of the afternoon, but we certainly did see quite a few storms racing through that front. It was quite fast moving, and that's one of the reasons the rainfall totals were more moderate overall than very high, but those storms did still bring some isolated higher falls and some isolated flash flooding in parts. Look, we do still have a thunderstorm warning current for parts of southern Queensland as this system is now contracting into northeast New South Wales and southern Queensland, continuing to generate thunderstorms and rainfall. However, much more settled conditions have extended across much of Victoria and southern New South Wales in the wake of this system.
A 4-tower development with 900 apartments in Sydney's northwest is at threat of collapse after the State Building Commission found defects in the load-bearing concrete. Jessica Rendell reports.
The New South Wales Building Commission said that there was serious damage to a concrete slab in the basement and ground floor levels of this precinct behind me here, adding that there was also a threat of collapse. Today, the New South Wales Building Commissioner David Chandler spoke to ABC Radio Sydney and said while there was a set of circumstances that need to be fixed, there is absolutely no threat of collapse. He said the Commission was obliged to use the language that's provided in the legislation in making these decisions. Now, the order was widely reported in the media and prompted the residential building strata manager to send out a letter refuting the threat of collapse and said they were in the process of obtaining an explanation from the building commissioner as to where they got the evidence from. Now, no doubt it's been a frustrating back and forth for residents, some who say the poor communication meant they only found out about the issues through the media and that it's been quite an anxious wait for information. Take a listen to what one resident had to say.
The fact that we found out by the media, I think, is really poor form. Since apparently, we believe they've known this issue since about August last year, and now we finally get an email from the building management this morning, obviously trying to get in front of the narrative, discrediting the building commission, telling us not to speak to the media. I don't know where they get that authority from, but anyway, I just think that's poor form. It's just really bad communication.
The Greenland Group have been given 2 months to scan that concrete slab and commission an engineering report, and 8 months to fix the situation. Here at the precinct, though, at Macquarie Park, it's been business as usual, with customers using this car park behind me here regularly.
Queensland Premier Stephen Miles will meet the chief executives of the nation's major supermarkets today amid concerns Australians are paying too much at the checkout. Mr Miles wrote to Coles, Woolworths, IGA and Aldi last week requesting a meeting with their CEOs. He wants them to explain why farmers are getting paid less for their produce while customers are paying more at the supermarket.
I've heard directly from farmers just how they're getting screwed down on the prices that they're getting paid by the supermarkets, even though their costs are going up. And at the same time, families are paying too much for fresh food at the supermarket just to put fresh food on the table and feed their kids. And so I think the starting point here is scrutiny and transparency. Queenslanders deserve to know just how much supermarkets are paying farmers and why they're not paying less for their groceries.
Industrial Relations Minister Tony Burke is meeting with DP World representatives today over the ongoing dispute causing serious delays at port terminals across the country. Business reporter Naseem Kardem has the details.
This dispute is mainly over pay. So the Maritime Union of Australia is asking for a pay rise for 1,500 of its workers. The company, though, says if you take in account back pay, that pay rise they're asking for is actually 27% over 2 years, which is too high. So the Maritime Union of Australia members have been taking protected industrial action. They've reduced that action to 2-hour stoppages now. But as you can imagine, this is affecting a lot of the containers coming into ports into Australia, and this is having, a big impact on businesses across the country. It's impacting both importers and exporters of all sorts of goods, but including fresh produce. So you can imagine if you're importing, fresh fruit and vegetables that you're selling to events, say, such as Chinese New Year, they might not get to them in time now. It also means they perish and the business has to wear that cost. It's also affecting a lot of exporters who are exporting products such as wine, which is, obviously a time of year when they're exporting this product, in addition to meat. So it's really having a major impact, and they're among a number of voices that are calling on Federal Minister Tony Burke to intervene. I've talked about the, importers being affected. Now that could potentially see, if this drags on, that could potentially see the prices that consumers pay at the shops increase. And that obviously has a big inflation impact. And this is a time where we really the Reserve Bank's been working very hard to try and keep inflation under control. So it's really risky if this does push up inflation, because rather than seeing rate cuts this year, what you might then see is more rate rises.
Sam Yang is here now with the business news. Hi there, Sam. So the December jobs numbers are out. How are they looking?
Yeah, according to the latest data, seasonally adjusted from the Bureau of Statistics, the unemployment rate remained steady at 3.9% in December. That's in line with what economists had widely predicted. However, 65,000 jobs were lost over the month of December. That's a big drop in jobs. And in terms of participation rates, there has been a slump in the participation rate as well, fell from 67.3% in November, which was a record high, to 66.8%, meaning that 66.8% of Australians who are aged 15 and over were either looking for a job or working. And so the slump in participation rate, meaning that less people were working or looking for work in December. However, the slump in the participation rate prevented the fall in jobs, translating to a rise in unemployment rate, which means probably that's the reason that we've seen that the 3.9% that's unemployment rate remained steady. However, the hours worked also slumped by 0.5% last month, reflecting the shift from full-time towards part-time jobs, meaning that perhaps households may have a bit less income over that period, and they might be more worried or conscious about their finances in terms of the spendings heading into the new year. And I spoke to ANZ senior economist Adelaide Timbrell earlier, and she said today's data is very good news ahead of the RBA's meeting in February. And also she predicted that the unemployment rate will remain low throughout 2024, and the RBA is expected to cut rates later this year. Let's take a listen to what she had to say.
The fall in employment and the shift towards part-time work, which I think is probably, to me at least, the more important part of this data. This tells us that the average household is going to have a little bit less income, or there is going to be a higher share of our households who are thinking more carefully about their money. Now, that is something that hits the economy in a big way. The Reserve Bank, by pushing interest rates higher, is trying to slow the economy down. And when people are more likely to be working part-time or thinking more carefully about their spending, that's going to be slowing both economic activity and inflation down.
Much response on the markets to the numbers, Sam?
Well, the market is still falling in early trade, and also after the release of the new data from ABS about jobless rates. And the Aussie dollar was largely unchanged because that's pretty much in line with the estimates from many economists. Now, the Australian share market is still falling and tracking declines in global equities. And European shares ended sharply lower, sliding 1.1% as hawkish commentary from European Central Bank officials dampened hopes on rate cuts. Let's take a look at the numbers. The All Ords and the ASX 200 are down around 0.5%. All sectors are in the red, with real estate and mining stocks leading the losses. Turning across the region, where the NZ 50 is down around 0.4% at the moment, markets across China and Japan are mixed. Now, in the US, all three major indices finished the session lower after upbeat December US retail sales data eroded expectations that the Fed will cut rates in March. The Dow Jones Index down 0.3%, the S&P 500 down 0.6%, and the Nasdaq Composite lost 0.6% as well. Onto commodity markets now. Spot gold prices plunged to more than 1 month low. Right now, it's trading slightly higher. Crude oil prices are also pointing higher. And the Australian dollar is trading fairly steady at around 65.5 US cents. And that's Finance, Roz.
Thank you, Sam. New charges are being laid in the criminal case against Donald Day Jr., an Arizona extremist linked to the Queensland Wiambilla police shooting. Mr Day was arrested near Phoenix late last year and indicted on 2 charges related to making threats. North America correspondent Barbara Miller has the details from Washington, D.C.
Donald Day Jr. is charged with threatening FBI officers who were involved in processing him after he was arrested in early December. The alleged text of these threats is spelled out in a superseding indictment. It's expletive-laden. Donald Day Jr. Is alleged to have said that if the agents were to harm Donald Day's wife, then he would kill them, and that he said that these were not idle threats. He's also alleged to have been in possession of a string of firearms, including semi-automatic rifles and a pump-action shotgun. And he shouldn't have been in possession of those weapons because of a previous conviction. Also alleged to have had some unregistered firearms. Those charges now, in addition to the 2 that we heard about at the time of his arrest, one of those is unconnected to the Queensland attack, related to an alleged threat against a WHO, World Health Organization official, and the other one related to an online post he made in the wake of those attacks in Queensland carried out by the trains, in which 2 police officers and a neighbour of the trains were shot dead. He needs to be arraigned on these new charges. That date is next week. That's been set down for next week. There's also been some to and fro between his lawyers and prosecutors. His lawyers trying to get those initial charges dropped, saying that these weren't actual true threats that Donald Day Jr. was making. The prosecutors came back and said that a jury should decide whether or not these were serious and true threats or not. We're still waiting for that motion to be officially ruled upon, but for the moment, a jury trial is still set down, and that would begin on February the 6th in Arizona.
An explosion at a fireworks factory in central Thailand has killed about 20 people, but devastation at the scene has made the death toll uncertain. The factory in the heart of Thailand's central rice-growing region was virtually levelled flat by the blast. It's thought as many as 30 workers could have been in the building at the time of the explosion. The cause is under investigation, but authorities say it was likely ignited by construction work at the warehouse. Both King Charles and the Princess of Wales will be away from public duties temporarily for health reasons. 42-year-old Catherine is recovering from successful abdominal surgery, and next week the King will have treatment for an enlarged prostate. It'll force them to delay previously planned engagements over the coming weeks.
Inside this London hospital, Princess Kate is recovering from surgery to her abdomen.
It's clearly a problem for Buckingham Palace. It's a tricky situation.
The Princess had the planned operation on Tuesday. Her office provided no further details, but said her condition wasn't cancerous.
Based on her age, based on her fitness. Her recovery should be straightforward. And as long as she looks after herself and not rush back to her very, very busy schedule.
And she won't be. The Princess will be in hospital for up to 2 weeks and is unlikely to return to public engagements until after Easter. The Princess has expressed through a spokesperson that she understands there'll be significant interest in her surgery, but her focus right now is maintaining normality for her children. Less than 2 hours after the news of Kate, it was revealed King Charles would also be stepping back from royal duties for health reasons. In a statement, Buckingham Palace said, in common with thousands of men each year, the King has sought treatment for an enlarged prostate. His Majesty's condition is benign and he will attend hospital next week for a corrective procedure. The King hopes his treatment will encourage more men to get their prostate checked.
Well, I hope it will open those conversations that men can have with each other. And hopefully with their GP. Sometimes we hear men talk about how they find it embarrassing to talk about any prostate problems. But I think it's fantastic that, again, it opens the opportunity to really understand that prostate problems are common and they're nothing to be embarrassed about.
The King, who was last seen in public on Christmas Day, hopes to be back at work in a few weeks' time. Elias Kluwer, ABC News, London.
To cricket now, and day 2, the first test match between Australia and the West Indies is underway at the Adelaide Oval. Reporter Harvey Biggs is there and joined us now. Hi, Harvey. So a debutant for the West Indies stole the show yesterday and he's doing the same again today.
He certainly is, Ros, and that man is Shamar Joseph, who's having an incredible debut, and I think he's winning quite a few hearts and minds here at Adelaide Oval. He got Cameron Green out with his 4th delivery of today's play, and of course he got Steve Smith out with his first delivery in Test cricket yesterday. Now both those two players were the key focus and storylines heading into this Test match. Of course, Cameron Green is coming back into the team to replace David Warner. He's batting at 4, and of course Steve Smith has moved to the top of the order to open the batting. And we thought that we'd be talking about those two men, Smith and Green, but they made 12 and 14 respectively, and instead the spotlight is on Shamar Joseph. He has an amazing story. He is 24 years old. He's only started playing professional cricket less than a year ago and is from a remote village in Guyana. Now, he also smacked around the Aussie bowlers yesterday, putting on 36 runs in a final wicket 50-run, 5-run partnership to push the West Indies score to 188. And we're actually in a bit of trouble trying to chase that down right now. Mitch Marsh was the last batter to go out. We are about 5 down for 130, 140 so a bit of work to do here, Ros.
Thanks, Harvey. Time for a check of the weather now. Here's Nate Byrne. Oh, we'll catch up with Nate a little bit later on. Actually, we can go there now, Nate.
The monsoon continues to drench the north. Warnings on in the Territory, heavy falls and damaging winds. We could see some more severe thunderstorms for southeastern Queensland, northeastern New South Wales with the tail end of a front there. Meanwhile, heat is building in the west, extreme heatwave conditions and plenty of high fire danger to contend with for WA. In terms of rainfall, there's a lot of it, particularly up in the north through the day today. And we're watching out for a tropical low in the Coral Sea that's likely to intensify to cyclone strength in the coming days. We could be looking at a coastal crossing in the week ahead, potentially. Either way you cut it, though, it is certainly soggy across the north with an active monsoon. Tomorrow, we've got a shower around for Brisbane. It's getting to 33 degrees, then a fine one, 29 in Sydney, 27 for Canberra. There is a possible shower both in Melbourne and Hobart, both getting to 21. Fine in 28 if you're in Adelaide or Perth, and up top Darwin, more showers and storms. You're getting to 32.
You can keep up to date at news.abc.net.au and on ABC iView. Here are the top stories on ABC News. Foreign Minister Penny Wong has met with Palestinian leaders as part of her week-long tour to the Middle East. In her visit to the West Bank, Senator Wong told the Palestinian Prime Minister that Australia has supported calls for a ceasefire. Having now returned to Israel, Senator Wong says it's clear how heavily the conflict is weighing on people in the region. She says Israelis and Palestinians want peace, security and dignity. 2 teenagers have been charged with murder following the death of a doctor in Melbourne's east. 2 16-year-old boys will face a children's court over the death of Ash Gordon in Doncaster last weekend. The body of the 33-year-old was found on a street near his home after an alleged aggravated burglary. The official unemployment rate has remained steady at 3.9% in December, but the Bureau of Statistics figures reveal more than 65,000 jobs were lost during the month. A slump in the participation rate from 67.3 to 66.8% prevented the fall in jobs, translating to a rise in unemployment. The second round of the Australian Open continues today, with Australian Max Purcell hoping to pull off a major upset against 11th seed Casper Ruud. Ayla Tomljanovic will face a similar hurdle today as she comes up against Jelena Ostapenko. Another Aussie, Thanasi Kokkinakis, will also be in action against Bulgarian Grigor Dimitrov in his second round matchup. A shipment of aid secured under the first agreements between Israel and Hamas since last year is on its way to Gaza. The deal includes medicine, which will be given to hostages held by Hamas. Middle East correspondent Tom Joyner has the details.
Aid has been trickling into the Gaza Strip for months now, albeit barely enough to sustain life for Palestinians under Israeli assault. But this shipment is different. It includes vital medication for Israeli hostages still held captive by Hamas. It's the result of a new deal struck between Hamas and Israel, the first since the ceasefire back in November, which saw the release of more than 100 hostages from Gaza and scores of Palestinians detained in Israel. The agreement was brokered by France and Qatar. Negotiations have been going on for some time there. The medicines will be delivered for 45 chronically ill hostages, providing them with a 3-month supply. Some of them have been without the medicines they need for more than 100 days. The International Red Cross, which often acts as an intermediary with Hamas, will hand over the medication inside Gaza. Now, according to Hamas, for every box provided to the hostages, the shipment also includes 1,000 boxes of aid for Gazans themselves who are suffering widespread disease and hunger. The UN now says a quarter of Gaza's entire population, we're talking more than 500,000 people, are starving.
This war is psychological, a war of fear, a war on food, war on clean water. If you want to buy a pack of bread, you need to stand in a queue for 4 to 5 hours. If you want to fill up water, you would need another 4 to 5 hours.
Israel has destroyed communication infrastructure in Gaza, plunging the Strip into a blackout since last week, meaning more than 2 million people have had phones and internet cut off. That's made it impossible for them to receive warnings, for example, about Israeli bombs, or contact emergency services, or even check in with their family to see if they're even alive. It's the longest blackout since the war began on October 7. Things have now deteriorated so much in Gaza that the chief of the UN's Palestinian Refugee Agency says Gazans are simply losing hope. They can no longer bear to imagine raising their own children or picture a future for themselves and their families now that Israeli tanks and bombs have destroyed nearly everything around them.
Tom Joyner reporting. The United States has conducted another round of strikes against Houthi targets in Yemen. It comes as fuel giant Shell has reportedly suspended all shipments through the Red Sea, saying its priority is protecting people and assets. Yemen's Houthi rebels have been targeting ships in retaliation for Israel's strikes on Gaza, prompting action from the US and the UK. Director of the Freight and Trade Alliance, Paul Zaleh, says rising tensions in the Red Sea are concerning.
In an Australian context, it is very important. We receive approximately about 50% of our petroleum product from Singapore, and then the rest predominantly from other parts of Asia. But they receive about 40% of their supply of raw crude oil from the Middle East. So it's an area that we'll be watching of great interest. From a broader perspective of interest to our membership and the work we do, at this stage, the bunker fuels, the fuels used by other international vessels, is unaffected. So that's one encouraging element at the moment. But I think I suppose the good thing is that the trade will continue. It will come at an extra cost. We're seeing freight rates already now from parts of Europe to Australia are doubling. We're also seeing a range of different surcharges that have been implemented, and that is hurting our import and export market, because the shipping lines have been able to recover their costs for this extra voyage almost immediately by implementing these surcharges. But our importers and exporters hadn't factored that into their contracts. So that will be an issue for them in the short term. But in the longer term, assuming the hostilities do continue for an extended period of time, we'll see the international shipping adjust to these longer voyages. It will have a knock-on effect around the rest of the world because it will use extra vessels, extra sea freight containers, and we are seeing a shortage of empty sea freight containers in different parts of the world already as a result of this disruption. So it's a very difficult and challenging time. In our freight forwarding sector that looks after importers and exporters are doing an incredible job at this time, and just managing the different methods of moving freight around the world.
A deadly blast that rocked the Nigerian city of Byrne has killed at least 3 people and injured dozens. Buildings in the 7 suburbs of Nigeria's third most populous city were reduced to rubble after explosives stored by illegal miners were set off. Temporary accommodation is available for those who have lost their homes, and search and rescue operations are underway.
So many people have been rescued already. Some were rescued alive, and some bodies have been recovered as well. Last night, some bodies were recovered, and this morning, about 2 bodies has also been recovered. And we are still in the process of searching.
The controversial Rwanda asylum bill has passed the lower house of Parliament in the UK. The bill is designed to override a decision by the UK Supreme Court that declared the policy of sending asylum seekers to Rwanda unlawful. Some experts say the plan is partly inspired by Australia's immigration policies.
The ayes to the right, 320. The noes to the left, 276.
The sentence that tells you the government has won. After all the noise, the numbers. The Rwanda plan lives on. This is what all of this is all about. The government has promised to stop the boats. The numbers are down, but migrants keep coming. This was Dover this morning. The Rwanda plan is about putting people off attempting this crossing, but no one who's made this journey has been sent there yet. In the Commons this evening, the Home Secretary had a go at uniting his bickering party.
Stopping the boats is not just a question of policy. It is a question of morality, and it is a question of fairness.
What a farce. Today and yesterday have been just another day of Tory chaos and carnage.
Far from dismantling criminal gangs, this government has become the criminal gang, breaking international law, moving vulnerable people across the world without legal process.
The story of the last 2 days has been the Conservative Party having a noisy argument with itself. Dozens and dozens of Tory MPs think the government plan probably won't work. 18 months ago, this plane was due to take some migrants to Rwanda, but at the last minute, using what are dubbed pyjama injunctions, the European Court of Human Rights said no, the plane never left. This afternoon, some Conservatives, including prominent ones, argued that the default legal position should be that these rulings are ignored.
The foreign court overrode English judges, overrode the will of the government, overrode the will of the British people.
But for all the argument, the now near 2-year project to send some asylum seekers here to Rwanda remains alive. What does the Rwandan president make of all of this?
It is the UK's problem, not Rwanda's problem.
But you're getting hundreds of millions of UK taxpayers' money with not a single refugee.
It is going to be used on those people who will come. If they don't come, we can return the money.
If people don't come, we'll return the money, he says. The UK's already handed over £240 million. And tonight is not the end of the wrangling over this policy. It heads next to the House of Lords.
India has taken over as the world's most populous country after China's population dropped for the second straight year. Official figures show that last year the number of inhabitants in China stood at 1.409 billion people. That's a decrease of 2.08 million, and the fall is more than double that of the previous year.
The number of births throughout the year was 9.02 million, with a birth rate of 6.39%. The number of deaths was 11.1 million, with a death rate of 7.87%. The natural population growth rate was minus 1.48%.
It's a record low birth rate in a country that strictly controlled growth with its one-child policy, which ran from 1980 to 2015. The number of deaths rose sharply by almost 700,000 last year, the highest since 1974. Increases were expected due to the easing of harsh COVID restrictions. Long-term, China's population is expected to fall by 109 million by 2050. And it's a population that's ageing, and turning around the fertility rate is proving to be a huge challenge. Many people are delaying marriage or choosing not to have children, in part because of the cost.
The government enacted some policies and appealed to the public to slow down this decline in population, and it's taken some effect, and there are some incentives for having children. I think some of these are useful, but people aren't going to have children just because of these incentives.
Nowadays, childhood is completely occupied by studies and academics, and kids get burnt out very easily. For the parents, they think that their children are under a lot of pressure, but the pressure parents experience is even greater than that of their own children. So this makes people a bit anxious about having children, and then people don't want them at all.
China's demographic shift comes as growth in the world's second-largest economy struggles from the effects of the pandemic, a real estate slump and declining demand for exports. GDP grew by 5.2% last year, but it was the weakest performance since 1990, aside from the COVID disruption in 2022. At the World Economic Forum in Switzerland, the Chinese premier says his country is on the right track.
As the world's second-largest economy, China has formed good and solid fundamentals in its long-term development. This is like when a person has a strong body, his immunity will naturally increase. Even though China's economy may experience some setbacks, its overall long-term positive trend will not change.
Millions of Americans woke up this week to snow, freezing rain and plunging temperatures as an Arctic blast gripped parts of the United States. The cold snap ends a nearly 2-year snow drought in some areas and has put much of the country's west into a deep freeze.
Picturesque scenes of snow. For many in the country's northeast, it's been the first significant snowfall in almost 2 years. It's brought joy to those both young and young at heart.
My daughter's 4. She doesn't remember the snow, so this is her first time actually checking it out. So yesterday, I said, it might snow today, you guys. So when they woke up this morning, see snow all over the ground, they lost their minds.
In the nation's capital, the winter storm closed government offices and proved the perfect conditions for winter fun.
It's kind of about like embracing your youth and kind of being a kid again, right? Like we're all out here working all the time and we haven't had a snow day in DC in a while. So I think a lot of people just wanted to come out and have a good time together.
For those of us who didn't grow up with snow, we had to live our childhoods right now.
But it's not all fun and games. These campers in Kentucky had to be rescued after getting caught in the storm. Dangerously cold temperatures are affecting much of the Rockies, Great Plains and Midwest, with wind chills below minus 34 degrees Celsius being recorded in many parts. The National Weather Service says about 150 million Americans are under a wind chill warning or advisory. At least 5 people have died since the weekend, including 2 from hypothermia, and tens of thousands have been hit with power outages. The hazardous weather conditions are expected to continue for the next few days. Madison Watt, ABC News.
The federal government is under increasing pressure to review tax cuts that are due to come into effect from July. The Prime Minister insists the so-called Stage 3 tax cuts will go ahead in July, reducing the tax rate for people earning between $45,000 and $200,000 a year. It'll set those earning $200,000 save an extra $9,000 in tax, whereas those on $60,000 will have an extra $375 in their pockets. But it's not without criticism from groups including the Australian Council on Social Service. Chief Executive Cassandra Goldie says the money could be better spent on people in need.
We need to fix the adequacy of those key income support payments. We need to get on top of those exorbitant rent increases, tackle the energy inflationary effects that are happening for people who cannot afford solar panels, for example, to reduce their energy bills, invest properly in essential community services. And how do we do that? We scrap those stage 3 tax cuts, which are giving exorbitant increases in cash in the hands of people on very high incomes, $9,000 per year extra for people on very high incomes. It's unaffordable. It's obviously very unfair.
The state of the Northern Territory's Freedom of Information system is in the spotlight after it took 17 months for one office to respond to requests for information from the ABC. There are now calls for more to be done to help bring accountability to the scheme nationwide. Thomas Morgan explains.
Freedom of information laws allow individuals to request information from government bodies. Under the various patchwork of federal and state laws, departments and government bodies can deny those requests on specific grounds. They can also ask for extra time to complete requests. In one instance here in the Northern Territory, an ABC journalist waited 17 months for a government office to process 4 requests. Another journalist is still fighting for a letter relating to the retirement of former Police Commissioner Jamie Chalker to be released. One transparency expert says it shows that the original design for FOI in Australia to allow Australians to access information from their own governments is being twisted towards secrecy. Meanwhile, the independent commissioner who has oversight of the NT's FOI system says extraordinary delays were very concerning.
There are always areas where there are concerns, and it's always important for government to provide a sufficient level of resourcing and also to give dealing with applications sufficient priority.
Commissioner Shoya says 96% of Freedom of Information requests in the NT are completed within 90 days. But he also says he's keen to contribute to a review the government is doing into the system.
King Charles is to undergo a corrective procedure next week for an enlarged prostate. Buckingham Palace says that the King's condition is benign and that the 75-year-old had sought treatment in common with thousands of men each year. Peter Heathcote is a urologist and the director of the Prostate Cancer Foundation of Australia. Very pleased to say joins me in the studio. Hi, Peter. So what sort of procedure is the King going to have?
Well, there's a range of procedures that are available for non-cancerous prostate enlargement in 2024. There's a minimally invasive group of procedures which are short stay in hospital and ranging to more standard procedures such as the rebore, as most men would know it, to remove the blockage.
Right, and how common is his condition in older men?
Oh, very. Very. Prostate enlargement is very common. 70 or 80% of men King Charles's age will have a degree of enlargement. The symptoms vary from patient to patient.
So the fact that Charles is going public about this, is that going to be good for awareness of the condition?
Fantastic, yeah, really good. As you know, traditionally men have not been great sharers of their medical conditions, but I think what's happened in the last 20 years with better health awareness, less smoking, looking after blood pressure and so on, men are living longer, and so they're going to be more aware of these symptoms as they get older. It's an ageing issue.
Is it true to say that providing you live long enough, you will have a problem with your prostate at some point? That's true to say?
More likely,
right.
Yes. More likely than not.
So it's a benign condition, Peter, but does it mean that the King is at increased risk of developing prostate cancer down the track?
No. Prostate cancer and non-cancerous prostate enlargement are two very separate conditions. They happen to be in the same gland. Now, prostate cancer can cause symptoms, no doubt about that, and I would ask every man in Australia if they have urinary symptoms to go and see their GP for a checkup, and part of that checkup will be to make sure there's no early prostate cancer.
OK, so but from what age should men start to get their prostate checked?
Depends on your risk. So if you have a strong family history, say a father or brothers who've been diagnosed at an early age, you should probably start seeing your GP from 45, 50 onwards, and ask your GP about a blood test and screening for early prostate cancer.
And other things that men can do to lower their risk of developing prostate issues?
Not really. You can't choose your parents. Age and family history are the two strongest risk factors for prostate cancer. There are others, but they're the major two. Right. The key is early diagnosis.
Okay. You mentioned this before, it's a blood test.
Yes.
For issues. It's not as an invasive a procedure as, you know, there's...
No.
The condition is notorious for.
Exactly. We prefer to say, go and get your blood test. Don't let a rectal examination put you off. It's not mandated or necessary.
Peter Heathcote, great to see you. Thank you so much for coming in. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Now, we all love our fresh Aussie produce, but there's less to like about all the soft plastic packaging it's often sold in. Now, a regional team of scientists is trialling new types of sustainable packaging that could both keep the plastic to a minimum and ensure less food ends up in landfill.
Kim Martin farms the leafy greens that go into salads across Australia.
So this is how they're harvested. Cut through there.
Due to the delicate nature of the produce, packaging is vital to safeguard it from damage and extend shelf life. But Kim says he's noticing growing discontent among consumers around what is being used as wrapping.
We often get the rubber bands and the tags returned, mailed back to us from the customers saying, could you please find alternate packaging?
The answer to that request could come from inside a Ballarat laboratory. Scientist Dylan Liu is trialling nanocellulose technology to create biodegradable food packaging.
We're creating these materials by using food waste, and that way we're going to having a sustainable material for packaging.
Tiny cellulose fibres are taken from food waste, then transformed into a sturdy film.
The material itself has a lot of applications. For example, it can be used in packaging, it can be used in biomedical area.
The lab trials are almost complete, and they're now looking to start a pilot study with the hopes that businesses could start using this plastic packaging over the next couple of years.
The biodegradable film coming from food waste, very circular, but that's where we've got to head.
Dr. Liu's research team has also developed a label that changes colour as food decomposes, potentially helping businesses and families keep food out of landfill.
When we saw these changes, we know the food is not good to use or is close to the use-by date.
It's hoped these homegrown ideas will be a step towards reducing the mountains of food waste produced in Australia each year. Fiona Broom, ABC News.
3 Australians are in action today on day 5 of the Australian Open. Tom Maddocks joins us now from Melbourne Park. Good afternoon, Tom. So before we get to today's matches, just tell us about Novak Djokovic, who was in action last night.
G'day, Ros from Melbourne Park. An extremely Melbourne weather day today. We've just had a bit of rain. The sun has just come out again, and there's wind as well, so we'll see how that affects play. But yes, last night, Alexei Popyrin was impressive, wasn't he, in his match against the world #1 and defending champion Novak Djokovic in that 4-set battle. Novak won the first set, and then Popyrin broke back in the second set to win that. Novak recovered somewhat in the third to win that in the tiebreaker. And then, as you're alluding to, Ros, in that 4th set, there was a moment on court, an interesting moment. Novak Djokovic approached someone in the crowd, a heckler, who had obviously been giving him a fair bit of grief throughout the match, and basically confronted him. Let's have a listen.
I was tolerating it from most of the match, but and at one point I had enough. If you have courage, if you're such a, tough man, tough guy, come down and tell it to my face.
And Tom, Max Purcell is on court in his second round match. How's he going?
He's just lost the opening set, Ros, against his Norwegian opponent, top seed Casper Ruud. He's gone down 6-3 in that opening set, unfortunately for the Australian, but it's a big match for him nonetheless. So much of the focus, as you know, Ros, has been on another Australian male in Alex de Minaur and his hopes this tournament. But Max Purcell is at a terrific 2023, rising up through the ranks in the ATP. And this is a big moment for him. He had a first round win, of course, and now he's up against Casper Ruud on the big stage. The other Australian man who's in action this afternoon is Thanasi Kokkinakis in his second round match against the Bulgarian Grigor Dimitrov. The 13th seed is in terrific form, Ros, having won the warm-up tournament in Adelaide, the Adelaide International, breaking his ATP title drought. But this match is on the People's Court, Ros, John Cain Arena, and so Thanasi says he really feeds off the energy of the home crowd, so expect that match to be a loud one.
And Ajla Tomljanovic headlines tonight's action, and there's a bit of history between the Australian and her opponent.
There is, Ros. Tonight's match between Tomljanovic and Jelena Ostapenko has the potential to get a little bit heated, and that's because of an incident which happened a few years ago. You might recall, Ros, at Wimbledon when not effectively, but Tomljanovic accused Ostapenko of faking an injury in the third set. So the context being Tomljanovic was 4-love up in that deciding set when Ostapenko called for a timeout because she said she was injured. But of course, Tomljanovic challenged that. Let's have a listen to that incident from a few years ago.
I hope you feel better. Yeah, I hope you feel better, yeah. Your behavior is terrible, terrible. You're the one. You have zero respect, yes?
And I think is disgraceful behavior from someone that is, you know, is a slam champion.
She cannot say anything because she knows zero about my injury. She doesn't know anything.
Tomljanovic, Ros, was asked about that this week. What happened, and if there's water under the bridge. And effectively, she said, "Look, what happened has happened. I respect Ostapenko as a player, and basically, let's get on with it." But the matchup itself, Ros, is a fascinating one. Ostapenko will be the favourite, no doubt. Tomljanovic, though, has shown glimpses of that form she had a couple of years ago before she was injured, and of course had to withdraw from the tournament this time last year. So fascinating to see how that one shakes down tonight, Ros.
Thanks for the update, Tom. Quick look at the national weather now. Brisbane, a shower or two. Sydney, partly cloudy. Canberra, mostly sunny. Melbourne, partly cloudy and becoming windy. Showers increasing in Hobart. Adelaide, cloud clearing, partly cloudy in Perth, and showers and a possible storm for Darwin. In Mexico, a Catholic mass has taken place with a difference. Much-loved pets, including dogs, cats and even a horse, arrived outside the San Bernardino church. The animals received a blessing and a sprinkling of holy water to protect them from danger and misfortune. The ceremony marks the feast day of St. Anthony, known as the protector of animals, a 4th century Christian who gave his inheritance to the poor and lived in the desert with only animals for company. That is ABC News for now. A reminder, you can keep up to date on all the latest news across all your devices at news.abc.net.au and on ABC iView. I'm Ros Childs. Thanks for your company.